Welcome to your lesson today on slope-intercept form. This is the method that we most commonly use to graph a line. And I'm going to show you what the two things are that we look for when we're using slope-intercept form. So slope-intercept form is in the form of y equals mx plus b. And the first thing you need to know is that your y is going to be on the left of the equal sign by itself. Your slope, which is m, is how you move, and your slope is always next to the x. And slope is a number. We just use m to represent that number. And then b is what we call the y-intercept, because we begin on the y-axis. And I like to think of m as how we move, and the b as where we begin. And this is called slope-intercept form, because we have our slope that we're given, how we move, and our y-intercept, which is where we begin. So again, I like to think of our m as our move, and our b as where we begin. And m and b are always going to be numbers so that you can easily graph them. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to identify the slope, which is m, and the b, which is where we begin. So it says, state the slope and y-intercept of the graph of each line. So remember that slope-intercept form is always going to be in the form of y equals mx plus b. Your slope, or your m, is next to your x. So here our slope, m, is -4. Now we want to write our slope as a fraction, as we've been doing in the past. And remember that when slope is negative, we go down and right. And when slope is positive, we go up and right. So pretend that our -4 was actually a +4. We would write that as 4 over 1 and go up 4, right 1, instead of down 4, right 1. Okay, b is going to be that last number by itself. Because there is a plus in front of that 6, that is a +6. And I like to write my b as a point. So I begin at 0, 6. Let's try another one. For number 2, my slope is next to my x, and my slope is a +3 over 4. So m equals 3 over 4. If my slope is positive, remember I go up 3, right 4. If my slope was a -3 over 4, I would go down 3, right 4. Okay, my b is where I begin. B is typically that last number with no variable next to it. Notice how there's a minus sign in front of that 8, so b is -8. So I'm going to begin at the point 0, -8. Okay, let's try one more. This is a typo. There should be a plus sign there. So my slope is next to my x. It's a +1/2. Remember, slope is how I move, and it's represented with m. I go up 1, right 2 because my slope is positive. And I begin at a +3/4, or 0,34. So as you can see, your slope, how you move, is always next to your x, touching your x, and then your b is going to be that number that's by itself, and that's where you begin. Now we're going to use slope-intercept form to graph these lines on an actual graph. So my first line is y equals 3x minus 1. So I'm going to first identify where I begin. My b is that last number by itself, which is -1. So I begin at 0, -1. And I'm going to place that point on my y-axis. My y-axis goes straight up and down, and I always begin on my y-axis. I always place my first point on my y-axis. I never begin on my x-axis. Okay, I always begin on my y-axis, and that's why it's called your y-intercept. Now my slope is my number in front of x. My slope is 3. Remember, I want to write my slope as a fraction. So 3 over 1. And because my slope is positive, I'm going to go up 3, right 1 from where I began. So I'm going to count that out. Up 3, right 1. Up 3, right 1. Now I also can go in the opposite direction. Down 3, left 1. Okay, so that is my line from y equals 3x minus 1. I began at 0, -1, and then I go up 3, right 1. Let's try another one. My b for this line is -5. If there was a plus in front of that 5, my b would be +5. So I begin at 0, -5. So that's going to be right here. Now my slope is -2/3. My slope is my number in front of my x, so my slope is -2/3. So I'm going to go down 2 and right 3. Notice that I go down and right if it's a negative slope, up and right if it's positive. Now, if I were to go down 2, right 3, I would end up off my graph, which I really want to have all my points on my graph. So what I'm going to do to continue my line is go in the opposite direction from 0, -5. So opposite of down is up, opposite of right is left. So I'm going to go up 2, left 3 to keep my line going in the same direction with a negative slope. Up 2, left 3. Okay, so that is my line. Let's try a couple more. So for number 3, I've got y equals -x plus 2. My b is a +2. So I'm going to begin at 0, +2. Notice how I have no number in front of my x, but a -1x is the same as just a -1x, where I write a 1 in front of my x. Now, remember that slope must be a fraction because I have to go down and right or up and right. So -1 as a fraction is -1/1. So my slope, or how I move, is -1/1. Because my slope is negative, I'm going to go down and right. If my slope was a positive number, I would go up and right. So from where I began, I'm going to go down 1, right 1. And just keep going in that pattern. Down 1, right 1. Down 1, right 1. Notice to go in the opposite direction, I go up 1, left 1. Okay, and that's my line. Okay, so let's try number 4. Y equals -5x minus 3. For this line, my b is -3, so I'm going to begin at 0, -3. Slope-intercept form is y equals mx plus b. You could also think of it as y equals mx minus b if your b is negative. My slope is in front of my x, which is -5. And remember that I always write slope as a fraction. So -5 as a fraction is -5/1. So my movement will be from where I begin, down 5, right 1, because my slope is negative. If my slope was positive, I would go up 5, right 1. So let's begin at 0, -3. Okay, I've done that. Now I'm going to move down 5, right 1. Okay, again, I'm off my graph. I have gone off my graph when I've placed that second point. So I need to go in the opposite direction from where I began. Opposite of down is up, opposite of right is left. So the only time I'm ever going to go left is if I need to keep my points going in the opposite direction from where I began. So I'm going to go up 5, right 1. And that's the only other point I can fit on this graph. Okay, so we're going to try 2 more. For number 5, I'm going to begin at 0, 4, 0, +4. Remember, my beginning point is always going to be that last number by itself with no x, because whenever we think of slope-intercept form, we have y equals mx plus b. b is that last number by itself, and it stands for where we begin. My slope is my number in front of x, or -7/4. So remember that I need to go down 7, right 4 to place my second point. Now, if my slope was positive, I would go up 7, right 4. So I'm going to begin at 0, 4, that point, and then I'm going to go down 7, right 4. Okay, and that's the only point I can fit on my graph. For this last example, my b is +3. Remember, slope-intercept form is y equals mx plus b. b is your last number, and b is just the letter we use to designate where we begin. M is how we move, and m is my number in front of my x, so that's -1/5, so I'm going to go down 1, right 5 from where I began. If my slope was positive, I would go up 1, right 5. So I'll begin at 0, 3. Then I go down 1, oops, down 1, right 5. I can also go up 1, left 5 to keep my line going. Okay, so that is all. Remember that the lesson was on slope, intercept, form, which is the way that we graph lines, and this is going to be most commonly what you use in pre-algebra and algebra. Our equation for that is y equals mx plus b, where m is how we move, or our slope, and b is where we begin, or our y-intercept. Remember that if your slope is positive, you go up and right. If your slope is negative, you go down and right. Thank you for watching, and if you have any questions, let me know.